It was the summer of 1999 in Portsmouth, Maine, and the night smelled like salt, gasoline, and the faint tang of fish from the harbor. I was 15, stubbornly wired with more energy than sense, and too restless to stay indoors. Caleb lived 2 streets over, a careful, measured kid who made lists for everything, even for a simple sleepover, but even he couldn't say no when I suggested sneaking out. Our meeting spot was the cracked asphalt by the Harborview docks. Skateboards in hand, we were out chasing freedom, running from the silence at home. My dad had left that spring, leaving our house hollow and cold, and Caleb's parents were barely speaking. Out there, under flickering streetlights, we felt like kings of a city that otherwise ignored us. We pushed our boards along the streets, the rattling wheels blending with laughter, music from my battered Walkman, and the soft slap of night air against our faces. We joked about school crushes, the dumb things our siblings had done, and whether the fireworks at Prescott Park next month would be worth the trouble. But somewhere between the abandoned warehouses and the quiet piers, the air shifted. Shadows loomed near the end of the pier. At first I thought they were just fishermen who'd stayed too late, but as one of the dock lights buzzed to life, I froze. 5 men in dark fisherman coats, shaved heads glinting under the yellow light, stood absolutely still. No words, no smoke from cigarettes, just a frozen stare. One of them lifted a hand slowly, beckoning, and my chest slammed tight. "Don't look, just go," Caleb whispered, gripping my sleeve. But curiosity had me rooted. Then a voice, low and raw, rasped from the shadows. "Over here, boys." That was enough. Wheels pounding on cracked pavement, we raced toward the only lit spot nearby, a 24-hour laundromat on Briggs Street. Inside, the air smelled of detergent and humidity. Dryers spun, half empty, clanking rhythmically like a heartbeat. Not a single soul, no clerk, no customers. We ducked behind the counter, hearts hammering, ears straining. The bell above the door jingled. The men were inside, silent, moving with a predatory purpose. One dragged his fingers along the glass of a washer, whispering something I couldn't understand. Caleb's pager went off suddenly, the loud buzz echoing through the quiet. The 5 heads turned all at once, and a chill ran down my spine. Before I could react, one of them grabbed my arm. I felt cold steel brush against my skin. Then sirens, the shrill wail of police cars, cut through the night, red and blue lights painting the laundromat in jagged flashes. The men bolted, slipping out a side door like shadows dissolving in the dark. We stayed huddled until the officers arrived, our scraped palms and racing hearts the only evidence of our terror. Later, we learned the men were linked to kidnappings across Vermont and New Hampshire, missing posters pinned to every telephone pole along the coast. That night, Caleb and I sat on his porch, trembling in silence, realizing how thin the line between normal life and danger could be. The days after that night blurred together in a haze of caution and adrenaline. Even in the sunlight, I felt watched. Every shadow along the harbor seemed longer, every passerby a potential threat. Caleb and I avoided the pier, the laundromat, even streets we'd crossed 1,000 times before. Sleep became elusive. My parents noticed it, but when I tried to explain, it came out as stammering nonsense, so I kept quiet. School didn't feel safe either. Hallways were crowded, fluorescent lights humming overhead, but my thoughts drifted back to those men, their faces, the coldness of their gaze, and the way they disappeared before the sirens came. I couldn't shake the memory of the blade brushing my arm, or the way Caleb had gone pale, whispering my name. One afternoon, while walking home from the harbor with Caleb, we tried to talk about anything else. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked, voice low, eyes scanning the shadows. I don't know," I said. "They vanished like ghosts. But if they do, we won't be alone." We both shivered, though the sun was bright. That summer, every walk, every trip to the corner store, every ferry ride seemed fraught with invisible danger. My mother tried to get me to stay inside, but that only made me restless. I wanted normalcy back, even if it didn't exist anymore. By mid-July, the police had visited our homes multiple times, taking statements, fingerprints, and photos. They said the kidnappers were moving fast, targeting kids whose parents were distracted or absent. I felt exposed, like a target just for existing. Caleb and I developed a routine, checking the docks before leaving, walking in pairs at night, staying near crowded streets. Even when we went to the movies or hung out in daylight, I could feel eyes on us. Shadows seemed to shift in corners of my vision. Sometimes I'd swear I saw one of them in a parking lot, coat pulled tight, bald head shining in the sun, only for them to vanish when I blinked. We tried talking about it at school, but everyone laughed, calling it a summer adventure story. Only Caleb and I knew how real it had been. Only we had felt the teeth-on-ice panic, the instant rush of survival instincts kicking in. By August, we decided we couldn't just wait. We started noticing patterns. The docks were quieter at certain times. The laundromat's lights flickered on only during certain shifts. The police always arrived just a few minutes too late. Caleb wanted to tell someone in town, but I argued for caution. "Listen," I said one night while we sat on the roof of my garage, skateboards at our feet. "We survived because we didn't confront them. If we start talking or snooping, we're asking for trouble." Caleb sighed. "But we can't just ignore it. They could have caught us that night. Who knows who's next?" We started documenting. Every unusual figure, every cold breeze where there shouldn't have been one, every whisper or shadow. Our journals grew, a patchwork of anxiety and instinct. By late August, the kidnappings in nearby towns had made the papers. Reading those headlines made my stomach churn, but it also made me feel validated. We hadn't imagined it. Then one evening, a strange man approached us near the pier. He was older, unshaven, coat too large, and he had a folder tucked under his arm. "You boys saw them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. His eyes were kind but urgent. We froze. "Saw who?" Caleb said. "The men, the kidnappers. I've been tracking them. You need to stay safe, and I mean far from the docks until the investigation clears." He left the folder with us, a record of sightings, descriptions, and maps marking locations of previous abductions. That night we pored over it, seeing how close we had come to being another statistic. That summer ended with the beginning of school, and the kidnappers vanished from our lives as suddenly as they'd appeared. Police never confirmed if they were arrested, fled, or moved elsewhere. But for Caleb and me, something fundamental had shifted. We learned to trust instincts, to value caution over bravado. The docks, once a playground, became a symbol of risk. The laundromat, a reminder that luck sometimes mattered more than skill. I started noticing details I had overlooked before. Faces, voices, how shadows moved. My childhood felt thinner, stretched by the weight of survival. Caleb and I drifted back into routine, but we were older now, quieter. Adventures were slower, safer. Every skateboard ride, every walk home, carried the knowledge that danger could strike without warning. Years later, I can still smell the salt and gasoline of that summer. I think of the laundromat, of the sirens, of the 5 men who could have ended everything. I remember Caleb's wide eyes, my own racing pulse, and the fragile thread that held our lives together. That night taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. Bravery isn't recklessness, and curiosity can be dangerous when mixed with inexperience. Life is fragile, and sometimes survival depends on listening, hiding, and being smart rather than daring. Even now, every time I pass a laundromat at night, I pause, remembering the scrape of nails on glass, the cold eyes of strangers, and the sound of sirens that saved us. And I know, fear is not something to be shunned, but respected. It reminds you to pay attention, to value life, and to move carefully in a world where danger often lurks in shadows. Life can be unpredictable and dangerous, but awareness, caution, and respect for your instincts are the tools that keep you alive. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's acting wisely despite it. I was 20 years old in the fall of 2015, still trying to figure out who I was. I wasn't much of a partier, never the type to chase crowds or join in the chaos of campus life. Most nights you could find me hunched over my laptop in the dim light of my dorm room, editing photos of abandoned barns, rusted silos, forgotten graveyards. That was my thing, capturing what everyone else drove past without a second thought. My best friend Noah was the opposite in every way. Where I was quiet, he was loud. Where I leaned toward shadows, he lived for the spotlight. Theater was his kingdom, and he had this knack for turning everything into a performance, even ordering coffee at the student union. He didn't just want to live life, he wanted to perform it. It was Noah who showed me the Craigslist post. He slapped his phone down on the cafeteria table one October afternoon and spun it around toward me. "Check this out," he said, eyes dancing. The listing was short, almost cryptic. Genuine demonstrations of impossible illusions, no fee, inquire at the Holloway estate. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds like some weird LARP thing. Noah grinned. Exactly, which means it'll be hilarious. Worst case, it's some old guy doing card tricks. Best case, we catch something so freaky it goes viral. At the time, the internet was filled with those fake, haunted house reaction videos, people screaming in grainy night vision footage. Part of me wanted nothing to do with it. But another part, the photographer always hunting for the next surreal shot, felt a little tug. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "you want to drive out to some creepy house in the middle of nowhere because of a Craigslist post?" Noah leaned back, smug. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And you're bringing your camera." That Saturday, we borrowed his sister's car, a beat-up Civic with a muffler that rattled whenever we hit 60. The directions took us out of Charleston, past neighborhoods where Halloween decorations drooped from porches, into a stretch of county road lined with skeletal trees. The Holloway estate appeared like something out of one of my photographs, a rotting Victorian, its siding peeling, windows boarded in places but not all. It stood behind a rusted iron gate with a crest I didn't recognize welded into the bars. "This is perfect," Noah whispered, eyes wide as if the building itself were a stage set waiting for him to take his place. The gate was unlocked. It gave with a groan when we pushed. Gravel crunched under our sneakers as we made our way to the front door. My stomach twisted with a feeling I couldn't pin down. Excitement? Dread? When the door creaked open, the smell hit me first. Mildew and something metallic, like wet pennies. A tall man stood in the shadowed hallway, impossibly thin, dressed in a navy tailcoat that seemed 50 years out of date. He bowed stiffly. "Welcome to the Holloway estate," he said, voice low and deliberate, like every word was chosen with care. "I am Professor Vale." I glanced at Noah. His grin widened as if this was the best thing that had ever happened. "Hell yes," he whispered. "This is going to be amazing." I wanted to believe him. But as Vale gestured us inside, a cold certainty curled in my gut. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be a harmless performance. Vale led us through a narrow hall into what must have once been the parlor. The wallpaper peeled in strips, the ceiling sagged in places, but the center of the room was set with unsettling precision. A warped wooden table stood beneath a chandelier of dusty crystals, and on that table lay a series of hand-painted cards. Each card was thick, like wood shaved thin, the edges uneven. The symbols painted on them weren't letters or pictures I recognized. They looked carved, almost gouged into the surface, then painted over with black and crimson pigments that seemed to soak into the grain. "Each of you must choose," Vale said softly, his bony hands folded behind his back. Noah didn't hesitate. He always ran headfirst into whatever looked dramatic. He plucked a card bearing a crown, its points jagged like thorns. Vale's thin lips stretched into something that was almost a smile. He reached beneath the table and pulled out a heavy object that caught the dim light, a meat hook old and rust-flecked. Without warning, he brought it down into the table with a sickening crack, inches from Noah's hand. Wood splintered. "Jesus!" Noah yelped, stumbling back. That, Vale whispered, is the trick. For a beat, we just stood there. I thought maybe this was his act, shock value, a performance designed to scare us. Noah let out a nervous laugh, rubbing his wrist. Okay, he said. Creepy, but good showmanship, I'll give you that. Vale gestured toward me. And you? Every instinct screamed at me not to play along. But Noah was watching, eager, and something in me wanted proof that what I was seeing wasn't just an eccentric lunatic with props. I reached for a card. The one I chose bore a hollow eye, empty and staring. Vale's grin widened. He vanished into the adjoining room, without a word. We exchanged glances, Noah half thrilled, me half terrified. Then Vale returned carrying a gas lantern. The flame inside bent sideways, flickering against gravity as though drawn toward us. That was the moment the laughter died on Noah's lips. Okay, he muttered. That's not... How the hell did you do that? I shook my head. No wires, no draft, just that sideways flame hissing inside glass. Then I noticed the door we'd come through was closed. I tried the knob. Locked. My pulse quickened. Hey, I said, turning back to Vale. What's going on? He didn't answer. His eyes gleamed as he placed the lantern on the table, its flame still straining unnaturally. It was Noah who said it first. I think we should leave. But the exits told a different story. We rushed from room to room, searching for a way out. The kitchen door was nailed shut, boards crisscrossed with rusted nails hammered deep. Curtains were stapled over windows. Even the back hallway had been barricaded with stacked furniture. This is insane, I whispered, yanking at a nailed window frame until my palms hurt. Noah tried to keep it light, but his voice cracked. Okay, so, immersive theater. That's gotta be what this is, right? But when we stumbled back into the parlor, Vale was waiting. He held a phone in his pale hand, its cracked screen glowing. With unsettling calm, he pressed play on a video. The footage was grainy, filmed in a dim basement. A man sat tied to a chair, shirtless, eyes wild. Vale appeared in the frame, narrating in that same deliberate tone as he pressed nails through the man's palms one by one. I gagged, turning away. Noah's bravado crumbled, his jaw clenched, his face pale. You're sick, he hissed. Vale tilted his head. The audience demands authenticity. That was when Noah snapped. He grabbed my camera bag, yanked out the DSLR, and swung it like a club. The body cracked against Vale's temple. Blood ran down his face, but the smile never wavered. He raised the hook again, shambling toward us. Run, I shouted. But every door led to another locked barrier, another dead end. The house itself seemed designed to trap. And then, just as Vale lifted the hook for a final strike, the room lit up in flashing blue and red. The sound of sirens cut through the air, muffled by thick walls. Red and blue lights painted the broken windows. Vale froze, his expression twisting with something feral. He hissed words I couldn't understand, guttural and low, then slipped into the darkness behind the stairwell. The front door burst open. Officers flooded the house, flashlights cutting through shadows. Someone grabbed my arm, dragging me outside into the cold night. My legs shook so badly I nearly collapsed. They found blood in the basement, chains bolted to the walls, stained planks where someone had struggled. But Vale was gone. At the station, I gave my statement. So did Noah, though he tried to downplay his fear, cracking jokes through trembling hands. Weeks later, an officer called my dorm. Professor Vale was wanted in connection with at least 4 disappearances across West Virginia. The Holloway estate was condemned, the ground sealed. But Vale himself remained a ghost. Life didn't go back to normal. How could it? Every time I lifted my camera, I half expected to see his face in the viewfinder, grinning from some corner. Noah quit theater. He claimed he was too busy with classes, but I knew better. The stage was no longer fun after staring into the real performance of a predator. For me, photography changed too. Abandoned barns and graveyards no longer felt harmlessly eerie. They felt like warnings, like places where people disappeared. Sometimes when the dorm was quiet at night, I swore I could still hear the scrape of metal on wood, the sound of that hook splitting the table inches from Noah's hand. We survived, but not unscarred. Curiosity can lead us to extraordinary experiences, but it can also blind us to danger. Not every invitation is harmless, and not every performance is just an act. Sometimes, trusting your instincts, walking away when something feels wrong, is the difference between survival and becoming another name on a missing persons list. Long before that winter in 2007, before the snow packed Duluth like concrete, and the wind cut through your jacket no matter how many layers you wore, Lucas and I had been inseparable. We met in the second grade, sitting next to each other in Mrs. Whitaker's classroom. He was the kid who always had skinned knees and a grin that dared you to try something stupid. I was quieter, more cautious, the one who reminded him to grab his backpack before leaving school or to duck when he threw rocks at hornets' nests. Somehow we fit together. He brought the chaos. I brought the breaks. By the time we were 17, our friendship had hardened into something almost like family. My parents liked him, though they worried about the way he pushed boundaries. His parents didn't mind me hanging around, probably because I was the one who kept him from doing something that would land him in juvie. That fall had been rough on Lucas. His girlfriend of almost 2 years, Mariah, broke things off after a string of screaming matches in the high school parking lot. She accused him of lying, sneaking out at night, drinking too much. I didn't know what was true and what wasn't, but I'd seen him punch his steering wheel hard enough to bruise his knuckles the night she left him for good. He didn't cry, not in front of me, but something in him shifted. We'd always had this tradition: late night drives. No destination, just the road. Duluth is built on hills that roll down into Lake Superior, and at night the water looks like an endless black sheet. Street lamps flicker over snowbanks, and out on the county roads, the world shrinks to what your headlights can touch. Driving with him was our escape, our therapy, our way of pretending we were bigger than a small town with nothing to do. The night everything changed started like any other. A Friday, bitterly cold. The kind of night when breath froze into crystals before it even left your lips. I was sitting in my room half asleep over a history textbook when the crunch of tires in the driveway pulled me to the window. Lucas's old Chevy Suburban idled at the curb, headlights painting the snowdrifts yellow. I didn't need him to call. We never did. When I climbed into the passenger seat, the heater rattling against the cold, I could tell something was off. His jaw was tight, knuckles white around the wheel. He didn't greet me with the usual, "Ready to waste some gas?" Instead, he muttered, "Let's drive. I can't stay in my head right now." We didn't talk for the first half hour, just music, turned up loud enough to drown thought. I watched the snowy streets roll past, the houses glowing warm with Christmas lights even though December was still weeks away. But as the night stretched on, his laughter got sharp, his words clipped. There was a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen before, something darker than heartbreak. By the time the clock blinked past 3 a.m., I realized we'd circled the same back roads over and over. When we passed that rusting Amoco station for the third time, I tried to lighten the mood. "Guess the universe wants us to stop for snacks," I joked. He didn't laugh. His hands tightened on the wheel. That was when he said it. Not loud, not dramatic, almost like he was talking to himself. "Snow covers everything. Bodies too." The words froze me harder than the air outside. I turned to him, waiting for a grin, a wink, some hint he was messing around. But he just kept staring at the road, his voice low. Finally free. The heater hummed. The tires crunched against ice. And my best friend drove on, leaving me to wonder if the boy I'd known all my life had just slipped into someone I didn't recognize. I told myself it was just talk, the kind of grim nonsense that slips out when you're sleep-deprived and bitter. But when he muttered, "I buried her where no one will ever find her, and you helped me," my blood turned cold. I whipped toward him. "What the hell are you talking about?" His mouth curled into a smile. Not wide, just enough to make my skin crawl. He didn't answer right away, just flicked the blinker and turned us down another desolate road lined with trees that clawed at the sky. The snow packed high on their branches made them look skeletal, as if they were leaning in to listen. "I don't know what you're talking about, Lucas," I pressed. "Don't screw around like that." "You don't remember?" he asked softly, almost like he pitied me. Then he nodded toward my lap. My hands were folded there, trembling. "Look at your nails." I did. Dirt was jammed beneath them, thick and damp, the kind of soil that clumps from deep in the ground. I stared. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been digging. I hadn't touched the ground all night. "What is this?" I whispered. "You helped me," he said, steady now, calm in a way that terrified me more than if he'd shouted. "You wanted to. You just don't want to remember." I scratched at my palms, desperate to wipe the dirt away, but it stuck. My mind raced back over the last few hours. Had there been a blank spot? A lapse in time? I remembered getting in the car, remembered the music, remembered the endless turns around the same roads. But there were holes, tiny gaps I couldn't fill. Flashes of laughter that felt wrong, of cold air burning my lungs, of the weight of something heavy pressing against my shoulders. "No," I said firmly, more to myself than to him. "This isn't real." Lucas pulled the car to the shoulder and killed the engine. Silence swallowed us whole. Outside, the snow fell in thick sheets, muffling the world until it felt like we were the last two people alive. He turned to me, his eyes burning. "You remember more than you want to, don't you?" I shook my head, but images flickered in my mind. A shovel glinting in moonlight, my boots sinking into soft earth. Mariah's scarf, red, patterned with little white stars, lying crumpled in the snow. My chest tightened, each breath shallow. Was he planting this in me? Or was I uncovering something I'd buried inside myself? "Stop," I whispered. "You're messing with me. Tell me you're messing with me." He leaned closer, his breath fogging in the cold air. Snow covers everything, but not forever. The hours that followed blurred into a haze of dread and silence. We drove with no destination, his eyes fixed forward, mine darting to my dirt-stained nails, to the empty roads, to the shadows stretching long in the headlights. At one point I reached for the radio, desperate for noise, but he slapped my hand away. "No distractions," he said. My mind churned with questions I didn't dare ask. If he was telling the truth, if we had buried someone, if Mariah really was gone, why didn't I remember clearly? And if he was lying, why the hell was there dirt under my nails? Around 5 a.m. the sky began to lighten, a thin strip of pink bleeding across the horizon. Lucas pulled over by the frozen edge of Lake Superior. The water stretched endlessly, a dark mirror broken only by jagged ice. He shut off the engine, and the silence roared. "Tell me what you see," he demanded. I blinked. "The lake." He shook his head. "No. Tell me what you remember." "I don't." "You do." He grabbed my wrist, his grip iron. "Say it." I tried to yank free, but he held tight. My throat closed. Images hit me like waves, mud sticking to my gloves, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, Lucas's voice shouting, "Dig faster!" And then, faint but sharp, a scream that cut off too quickly. I ripped my hand free and shoved the door open, stumbling into the snow. The cold slapped me, grounding me, but the panic didn't fade. I bent over, gasping, staring at my hands. The dirt was real. The memory, God help me, felt real too. Lucas leaned against the hood, calm, almost smug. "See? You're not as innocent as you want to believe." "No," I snapped, "I'd never." "You already did." The sunrise painted his face in soft light, but there was nothing soft in his eyes. They were pits, hollow and endless. I thought about running, but where would I go? We were miles from town, the snow waist-deep on either side of the road. He had the keys and he was stronger. So I stood there, shaking, wondering if my best friend was confessing a murder, or if he was dragging me into madness with him. The sun climbed, turning the snow blinding white. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a heartbeat, I thought about calling the police, telling them everything, begging them to come. But what would I say? My best friend claims we buried his ex-girlfriend, and now I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind. They'd laugh, or worse, they'd come looking and find proof. Lucas noticed the phone. "Don't even think about it," he said, his voice steady, like a teacher correcting a child. "Nobody would believe you." I swallowed hard. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head. "Because lies rot you from the inside. You need to face the truth." "What truth?" I shouted. "That you're insane? That you're trying to drag me down with you?" For the first time, something cracked in his expression. His mouth trembled, his eyes glistened. "You think this is just me?" he whispered. "You think I could carry it alone?" I froze. The way he said it, the raw edge in his voice, made me doubt again. What if he wasn't lying? What if I had helped? What if that night, drunk on adrenaline or anger or something darker, I'd crossed a line I couldn't even admit to myself? But then I remembered Mariah's face at school 2 days earlier, storming down the hallway, very much alive. Unless memory was twisting again, unless time was unraveling in my head. I backed away from him, step by step, until my boots crunched onto the frozen edge of the lake. The ice groaned under my weight. "I didn't do anything," I whispered. "I didn't." Lucas smiled faintly, but it was sad now, almost gentle. "Keep telling yourself that." We didn't speak again on the drive back. The roads wound endlessly, the Suburban's engine growling as if it too carried the weight of what had passed between us. I stared out the window, the snow drifting down in thick curtains, wondering if I'd ever know the truth. When he dropped me off at my house, the sky was fully bright, the neighborhood stirring awake. My mom's car sat in the driveway, frosted windows catching the light. Normalcy, just a few steps away. But as I opened the door, Lucas caught my wrist one last time. His grip was lighter now, almost tender. "Snow doesn't keep secrets forever," he said. Then he let me go. I stumbled inside, heart pounding, nails still dark with dirt I couldn't scrub away no matter how hard I tried. I avoided his calls after that. At school, we drifted apart, though I felt his eyes on me across classrooms, steady, searching. Mariah left town the next week. Some said she went to live with her aunt in Wisconsin. Others said she dropped out, sick of the drama. Nobody knew for sure. Years later, I still don't. Sometimes I dream of shovels breaking frozen ground, of laughter that isn't mine spilling from my mouth, of screams cut short. Other times I wake certain Lucas was only twisting my mind, planting dirt and lies to trap me in his spiral. But either way, every winter when the snow piles high and the nights stretch long, I can still hear his voice. You remember more than you want to, don't you? And I still don't know how to answer. Evil doesn't always show itself in strangers or monsters. Sometimes it comes through the people closest to us, wrapped in friendship, pulling us toward shadows we can't easily escape. Never surrender your truth to someone else's madness. Doubt, fear, and manipulation can plant seeds that grow into guilt, but only by holding firm to what you know of yourself can you survive. Always trust your instincts and never let someone else rewrite your memory into their story. I've always been the kind of kid who chased the thrill. Growing up in Ravenwood, Oregon, there wasn't much else to do. The town was quiet, sleepy, and almost permanently wrapped in mist that blurred the lines between reality and imagination. My best friend Clive and I fed off each other's recklessness. We'd spent countless afternoons leaping off docks into freezing water, sneaking into abandoned warehouses, and inventing dares that bordered on dangerous. If someone said, "You can't," it was practically a command. By the spring of 2011, we were 17 and restless. Everyone else in town was caught up in schoolwork, sports, or jobs. But Clive and I were still hunting for that next rush. That's when the Hawthorne estate entered our radar. The mansion sat at the edge of the forest like a decaying crown. Rusted gates swung loosely, and vines clawed at the stone walls. The townsfolk whispered stories about the Hawthorne family, a wealthy line that vanished almost overnight. Some said Mr. Hawthorne had gone mad, some said he left for good. But no one had seen anyone in that house for decades. Naturally, this made it irresistible to us. We spent a week planning. I'll admit part of the excitement wasn't just the thrill, it was testing ourselves against fear. Clive was a bit more cautious than I was. He liked the adrenaline, but he also liked a way out if things got real. I, on the other hand, had no such hesitation. "Are you seriously going through with this tonight?" Clive asked as we sat in my car, parked a few blocks from the mansion. The night air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke from someone's chimney. "I wouldn't let you go alone," I replied, though I secretly didn't mind pushing him further. "It's just a house. Old, creepy, but empty. Probably rats and dust." Clive shrugged, flipping his flashlight in his hands nervously. "Yeah, rats and dust. Sounds like a perfect Saturday night." By 11:45 p.m., we were at the gates. The metal groaned when we pushed them open, scraping against the cracked stone. As we walked up the overgrown path, every branch snapping underfoot sounded like someone following us. My flashlight swept over the mansion's facade, Gothic, peeling paint, dark windows like hollow eyes. I swallowed, tasting both fear and excitement in my throat. Inside, the house smelled like wet wood and rot, with an undertone of something metallic. Our footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness. Chandeliers swayed slightly as if stirred by invisible hands, and cobwebs brushed our arms. I ran a hand across the railing of a grand staircase. The paint flaked into my palm. Clive shivered beside me. "This place is massive," he whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice unnaturally loud in the silence, "and empty, just like they said." We explored cautiously, peeking into rooms filled with broken furniture and yellowed newspapers. Then we heard it, soft whispers, curling through the hallways like smoke. At first, we froze, thinking it was the wind. "Did you hear that?" Clive asked, voice low. I nodded, my stomach knotting. The whispers grew louder, almost coherent, repeating a phrase that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Don't leave." Panic didn't hit immediately. It crept in slowly, like the mist outside. At first, we tried to ignore the sound. Rationally, I knew houses creak, floors settle, air whistles through cracks. But this was different. It was intentional, focused, almost conversational. "Maybe it's the wind?" I suggested, though my voice lacked conviction. Clive shook his head. "No, it's like someone saying something. I don't know what it is, but..." He trailed off, eyes wide as he scanned the hallway. I took a step forward, flashlight trembling. "Come on, let's check the library. Maybe it's just an old phonograph or something." As we turned the corner, a draft swirled past us, carrying the whispers louder. Clive froze. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. "Clive?" I stepped closer, placing my hand on his shoulder. His skin was cold, clammy. "It's nothing," he muttered, finally shaking his head as if waking from a trance. But the fear in his eyes told me otherwise. We tried the front door. Locked. Not just stuck, but firmly secured, like the house didn't want us to leave. Panic bubbled. "What the hell?" I muttered, pushing again. The wind outside roared, and the old wood groaned under pressure, but the door didn't budge. Clive grabbed my arm, pointing down the hallway. "There, did you see that?" I followed his gaze and froze. Shadows twisted unnaturally, like they had life. A figure, or maybe just a trick of light, appeared at the end of the hall, moving toward us in a gliding, unnatural fashion. "We need to get out. Now!" I hissed. He nodded silently. We bolted for a side door, kicking and pushing, and finally stumbled outside into the night. The air felt heavier than before, almost acidic. Clive's breathing was ragged, shallow, and when he finally spoke, his voice was tight. I don't remember what happened in there. Even now, decades later, I remember the fear, how close the whispers felt, like cold hands brushing against the back of my neck, and how, for one night, the mansion seemed alive, aware, and hungry. The next day, curiosity replaced fear. I needed to know what had happened inside. Clive refused to go back, but I started researching the Hawthorne estate. Town records were sparse. The family had vanished suddenly in the late 1940s, leaving the house untouched. Locals whispered about curses, hauntings, and inexplicable disappearances. I don't care what anyone says, I told Clive over lunch, trying to sound casual. There's a logical explanation. Old houses make noises. Shadows play tricks. People exaggerate. Clive stared at me, pale. You don't get it, man. That house, it's not just noises. It's like it wants you inside. Like it knows you're scared. I laughed, though my stomach churned. We drove by the mansion later that week, careful not to stop. The air seemed heavier and the gate groaned under the wind. I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving behind a cracked window. My heart raced, and for the first time I considered leaving it alone. But curiosity won. Over the next month I scoured libraries, old newspapers, and town records. I discovered rumors of the last family's wealth. A hidden safe rumored to contain documents that vanished along with them, and whispers of a caretaker who disappeared suddenly, never to be seen again. Months later, emboldened by research, I suggested we return, this time prepared. Not out of recklessness, but determination. Clive hesitated. Are you insane? After everything? I need answers. I need to know what's really there, I replied. We arrived at night, this time equipped with cameras, gloves, and ropes. The air smelled of wet earth and decay. The house seemed quieter than before, almost welcoming. But as soon as we stepped inside, the whispers began again, soft, insistent, almost hypnotic. Clive froze, but I pressed on. The shadows shifted in the corners of my eyes. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind, felt alive. We reached the library, finding old books and a diary belonging to the youngest Hawthorne child. It detailed strange sounds at night, voices calling, shadows moving. The last entry ended abruptly. They are coming. I can't leave. The whispers grew louder. I realized the house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by fear itself. The fear fed off curiosity, imagination, and obsession. Clive and I finally understood. Some doors, once opened, should remain closed. We left that night for the final time. No photos, no recordings, we didn't need proof. The house didn't follow us, but the memory stayed. Over the years, we told only fragments of our story. The Hawthorne estate remained abandoned, and Ravenwood continued its quiet, foggy life. But sometimes, in the rustle of leaves or the wind through the trees, I hear whispers, reminders of that night. Though hard-earned, curiosity is powerful, but some boundaries exist for a reason. Exploring the unknown can teach you, thrill you, and scare you, but respect, caution, and awareness are vital. Some doors, literal or metaphorical, are better left closed. And sometimes, survival is the only proof you need. I've always thought of myself as the kind of person who slips under the radar. Not shy exactly, but never the one to demand attention. In 2018, I was 19 years old, a sophomore at Burlington University in Vermont, and my life was as predictable as the squeak of the old door at the hardware store where I worked part-time. The shop sat a few blocks from campus, wedged between a laundromat and a bookstore that smelled permanently of old paper. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for groceries and rent. I actually liked it. The smell of fresh lumber, the faint metallic tang of nails and screws, the way customers came in with a problem and left with a solution in a paper bag. I had this habit of sketching in the downtime, doodling tools or gadgets I thought could make life easier. Mr. Denning, my boss, didn't mind. He was an older guy who believed in keeping busy, but also believed in daydreams. That's how inventions start, he told me once, tapping the page of my notebook. Somebody's daydream. My best friend, Miles, thought it was hilarious. He was the loud to my quiet, always spinning stories on his late-night radio show and dragging me out to places I wouldn't go otherwise. He'd swing by the shop, lean against the counter, and grin at me. "You've got romance tucked between the nails and screws," he'd say. "Romance?" I'd scoff. "You think love is hiding in a box of washers?" "Not washers, maybe paintbrushes. Some artsy girl's gonna walk in here, ask you about a screwdriver, and walk out with your heart." I laughed him off, but he wasn't entirely wrong. At that point, I'd never had anything serious. A few short flings, some awkward first dates, but nothing worth writing home about. I was fine with that. My world was homework, sketchbooks, work shifts, and the occasional burger run with Miles. Simple. Safe. But safe can feel like a cage when you're 19. And part of me, though I wouldn't admit it, wanted something to shake me out of the routine. I just didn't know what that something would be. That something arrived on a rainy Tuesday night. The rain had been falling all day, soft but steady, drumming against the thin windows of my off-campus apartment. The kind of rain that makes the streets glisten under the streetlights and convinces you to stay in. I was sprawled on my bed, flipping between half-hearted notes for an engineering class and my phone. Out of boredom, I opened a dating app. Most profiles looked the same. Posed smiles, quotes from movies, promises of loving adventure and coffee. And then I saw her. Clara Vale. Her photo wasn't flashy. Shoulder-length brown hair, no heavy filters, and eyes that seemed to laugh even without a smile. Her bio read, artist, coffee addict, maple syrup enthusiast. Let's argue about Vermont versus Canada. I chuckled, thumb hovering. Then I swiped right. When the screen lit up, it's a match. My chest buzzed in a way I hadn't felt in a while. Our first messages were playful, almost too easy. Me. Vermont syrup wins, no debate. Clara. Bold words from a guy who probably buys store-brand pancakes. Me. College budget. You offering to upgrade me? Clara. Only if you admit Canada's the real deal. The banter rolled like that for hours. From professors we couldn't stand to our most embarrassing childhood stories, she pulled me into her orbit quickly. She was sharp, quick-witted, and didn't let me get away with lazy answers. By the time I went to bed that night, staring at the rain streaks on my window, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just passing time on a rainy evening. I was waiting for her reply. I didn't know it then, but that yellow umbrella she carried the first time we met would burn itself into my memory forever, not as a symbol of love, but as a warning I'd only understand too late. Meeting Clara in person felt like stepping into a movie scene. We'd been talking for nearly 2 weeks when we decided on coffee at a little shop near the Church Street Marketplace. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time I got there, nerves buzzing as I sipped from a chipped ceramic mug. Then she appeared, clutching a bright yellow umbrella that made her stand out against the gray evening. She laughed as she nearly tripped on the curb outside before pushing the door open. That laugh, it stuck with me. Warm, unguarded, like she was letting me in on a secret. "Ryan?" she asked, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "Yeah," I said, standing awkwardly. "I almost broke my neck out there," she said, grinning as she shook out her umbrella. "Would have been a short date." I laughed, tension slipping away. We sat, and within minutes, the awkwardness faded. Clara was magnetic. She spoke with her hands, her eyes lighting up when she described her art projects, murals, sketches, experiments with mixed media. She had opinions about everything, movies, politics, food trucks. I found myself leaning in, wanting more. We left the coffee shop hours later, walking along cobblestone streets slick with rain. She teased me about my engineer's brain, and how I probably saw the world as blueprints. I teased her about carrying an umbrella that looked like it belonged in a children's cartoon. By the time we hugged goodbye, my chest felt lighter. I hadn't expected it, but Clara was different. The weeks that followed were a blur. Movie nights where we stayed up too late. Trips to used bookstores where she'd pull random titles from the shelves and make me read dramatic passages aloud. Study sessions where I'd pretend to understand her art history notes. And she'd doodle in the margins of my engineering sketches. Even Miles noticed. "Man, you're glowing," he teased. "She better not replace me as your burger buddy." "She's not replacing anybody," I said. But even I heard the uncertainty in my voice. Because truthfully, I was falling hard faster than I wanted to admit. But looking back, I should have noticed the shadows early. The way her texts piled up if I didn't answer right away. The way her smile faltered if I mentioned plans without her. At the time, I brushed it off as passion. She cared, I told myself. She was invested. That was love, wasn't it? I didn't see it for what it really was. The first cracks forming beneath the shine. By the 4th month, Clara and I were inseparable, or at least that's how she wanted it. She showed up at the hardware store unannounced, leaning against the counter, scanning the aisles like she was hunting for rivals. One afternoon, Mr. Denning pulled me aside. "She seems spirited," he said gently. I laughed it off. "Yeah, she just likes to visit." But inside, I felt the weight of her eyes on me, the way she stiffened if a female customer smiled in my direction. It wasn't just the store. A simple photo of me and Miles at a small get-together spiraled into accusations. "Who's that girl standing next to you?" she demanded over text. "She's dating my friend James," I explained. "Doesn't look like it, you're smiling too much." Ooh. It was endless. Questions, doubts, accusations. I tried reassuring her, tried proving my loyalty, but nothing seemed enough. When I mentioned taking a step back, she flipped it around. "You're abandoning me," she cried. "You don't care about me the way I care about you." It worked. I stayed. Miles wasn't fooled. "She's not just jealous, man," he told me, leaning across the booth at a diner. "She's controlling you." I shook my head. "You don't get it." "No," he said flatly. "You don't get it. You're too close to see it." I wanted to believe him, but love had its claws in me. And when love feels like fire, it's hard to tell the difference between warmth and getting burned. The night it all came crashing down was cold and sharp, the kind of Vermont night where your breath hangs in the air like smoke. I'd been out with Miles and a few friends at a bar near campus. Nothing wild, just burgers, a couple beers, laughter. By the time I walked back to my apartment, it was past 2 in the morning. She was waiting. Clara stood outside my door, her yellow umbrella nowhere in sight, her hair wild from the wind. The moment she saw me, she launched into a storm of accusations. "Where were you? Who were you with? You think I don't know?" Before I could answer, she slapped me across the face. My ears rang. "Clara, stop." I tried to back away, but she followed, screaming, her hands flying. Fear surged through me as she shouted that she'd never let me go, that I was hers, that I'd regret trying to leave. I grabbed her wrists, holding her back, my heart racing. "You need to calm down. I'm calling the police." Her eyes went wide, then narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." But I did. With shaking hands, I dialed 911. She backed away as I spoke to the dispatcher, muttering apologies, promises, excuses. By the time officers arrived, she was gone, swallowed by the night. The days that followed were worse. Apologies poured in by text, then rages, then threats. I blocked her, but she found new numbers, new accounts. My phone buzzed with her presence until I silenced it completely. For a while, I thought maybe it would fade, that I could move on. I was wrong. It was a Saturday evening when the knock came. Heavy, deliberate, echoing through my apartment walls. I opened the blinds just enough to see him. a burly man I didn't recognize, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. He wasn't Clara, but I saw her in the screenshot a mutual friend had sent me the week before. She was smiling next to him, her arm wrapped around his. He banged again. "Open up," he shouted, his voice rough. My phone buzzed with threats. He knew my name. He knew my car. I didn't open the door. I dialed 911 again, my chest tight as glass shattered outside. He'd smashed my windshield. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. But they caught him days later, piecing together the harassment, the stalking, the trail that led back to Clara. She had enlisted him to scare me, to punish me for walking away. I filed a restraining order, changed my locks, cut every tie, and slowly, painfully slowly, I learned what love wasn't. Months later, I met someone new. She was patient, kind, and steady in a way that didn't demand constant reassurance. With her, I felt safe. I felt free. Still, when I walk past Church Street and see a yellow umbrella bobbing in the crowd, my stomach tightens. The memory comes back sharp, like a scar you can't rub away. Obsession had disguised itself as love, and I'd almost lost myself to it. Love isn't meant to chain you, control you, or fill you with fear. Real love gives you space to breathe, to grow, and to be fully yourself. Intensity isn't the same as devotion. Passion isn't the same as care. And obsession, no matter how sweet it looks at first, will always turn toxic. If you ever find yourself mistaking fear for love, remember, love that's real won't make you feel trapped. It will make you feel free. I never considered myself much of a social guy. Most nights, my apartment smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old vinyl records. The windows fogged from a heater that was past its prime. Ashwood University was small enough that everyone knew everyone, or at least knew of everyone, but that never mattered to me. My nights were spent either behind the espresso machine at the cafe downtown, or hunched over assignments for my communications classes, grading papers and trying not to think about how alone I sometimes felt. It was a crisp October evening in 2023, the kind where the wind cut through the streets and left a faint smell of leaves and wet asphalt. I had just finished closing the cafe, cleaning up the espresso station and stacking cups when I collapsed onto my sagging couch with my phone. Out of boredom, I opened a dating app I had swiped through a few times, mostly as a joke, scrolling past faces and bios that all seemed slightly off. And then, somewhere between muted orange leaves and dim streetlight selfies, I saw her. Violet Mercer. Her photo caught me. Bright auburn hair, sharp eyes, and a crooked smile that hinted at mischief. Her bio was witty, filled with clever quips about bad coffee and worse professors. I swiped right, not expecting much. A few minutes later, my screen lit up. It's a match. Our conversation started innocuously enough. "So, do you actually enjoy grading papers?" she typed. "Only when I'm masochistic," I replied. She laughed, virtually, but I could almost hear it. And that laughter became the hook I didn't realize I'd fallen for. We talked about classwork, shared jokes about eccentric professors, and soon, the messages spiraled into playful teasing. She was bold, witty, and a little unpredictable, the kind of person who could turn a mundane library study session into a comedy sketch. By mid-November, we were meeting regularly, casual coffees at the campus cafe, study sessions in the library where she'd distract me with whispered commentary about students passing by. And then, one chilly night, we officially became a couple. At first, it felt surreal. Violet loved midnight walks under the amber glow of streetlights, bringing pastries from the bakery where she worked, sharing playlists of obscure indie bands she claimed you'd never hear anywhere else. I found myself looking forward to her messages, her spontaneous visits, and the way she laughed at things no one else seemed to notice. But small cracks started appearing. She would text incessantly when I spent time with friends in the neighboring dorms. A group photo with my female lab partner prompted a sharp, icy message accusing me of flirting. I brushed it off as quirks, convincing myself that jealousy was just another form of affection. But by December, her possessiveness was relentless. 10-minute delays in replying to her texts sparked flurries of panicked or angry messages. She seemed to have almost no friends outside the university, making me feel increasingly isolated. One night, after politely asking for time to catch up with my childhood friend Lena, she accused me of wanting someone else, her voice cold, sharp, cutting through the phone. The tension, silent until then, thickened between us. I didn't know at the time that this was the beginning of a pattern, one that would escalate into fear I hadn't known existed. It was a Friday night at the Oakwood Bar, and I had been trying to relax after a long week of shifts. Violet had insisted on joining me, but by 1:50 a.m. I slipped out to call a cab. I didn't expect to see her standing outside my building when I returned, pacing aggressively, her eyes narrowed and a tremor in her voice. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. "I saw you sneaking off. Are you cheating on me?" she snapped. "I was calling a cab, Violet. That's it," I said, holding my hands up. Before I could react further, she slapped my chest and yanked my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. Panic surged through me, and instinctively, I held her wrists to calm her down. But her eyes flashed, and she hissed, "I can call the police and say you hurt me." I froze. "Violet, please, this isn't you. This isn't okay." She snarled, leaning closer, her breath warm against my ear. "You'll regret this." Something inside me snapped. For the first time, I realized that trying to reason with her wouldn't work. I stepped back firmly. "We're done. I'm ending this now." She muttered something under her breath, but I didn't wait for her response. I walked inside, bolted the door, and felt an icy weight lift slightly from my chest. But the sense of unease lingered. I knew this wasn't over. The following week, Violet's messages alternated between pleading, furious threats, and cryptic warnings. She texted at all hours, often in the middle of my shifts at the cafe. The anxiety she provoked was exhausting. One afternoon, a friend sent me a screenshot from her social media. Violet was smiling beside a burly bearded man with a menacing glare, a photo that immediately triggered dread in my chest. That Saturday night, alone in my apartment above the cafe, pounding at the door jolted me awake. The man from the photo shouted threats, claiming Violet had sent him to teach me a lesson. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 as his fists rattled the frame of my door. Police arrived just in time, taking the man into custody after he hurled final chilling threats. I stayed on the couch, shaking, trying to process the sudden terror. The next day, I filed a restraining order and carefully saved all messages as evidence. My hands were still trembling, but I felt a glimmer of control for the first time in weeks. I eventually unblocked Violet in a final attempt to confront her, hoping to hear some accountability. "Why are you doing this?" I typed, fingers shaking. Her response was a lie, smooth and calculated. "I don't know what you mean, Ethan." Silence followed. Weeks later, her account vanished entirely. Relief washed over me, but unease lingered. I learned that closure doesn't always come with an explanation. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the absence of chaos, when the storm finally moves on. During this period, I leaned heavily on friends, especially Lena. We reconnected over coffee and late-night walks, talking about everything except Violet. That distance, the space to breathe, reminded me that my life wasn't defined by fear. I began to rebuild the boundaries she had eroded. Years later, Ashwood streets feel safer, quieter, and somehow mine again. I'm in a grounded, healthy relationship, surrounded by friends who know the difference between affection and obsession. The memory of Violet Mercer hasn't vanished entirely. It never does. But it serves as a reminder rather than a threat. I learned to recognize red flags early, to value personal boundaries, and to act decisively when someone crosses them. Love can be intoxicating, thrilling, even blinding, but it can also be dangerous when cloaked in obsession, charm, or manipulation. Survival in relationships, as in life, depends on awareness, courage, and the willingness to walk away before things escalate beyond control. Sometimes I pass the Oakwood bar or glance at the streets where it began, and I remember the pounding heart, the fear, and the lessons learned. And I know this: boundaries matter, intuition matters, and when someone refuses to respect both, the safest choice is to step away, even if it means walking alone for a while. Attraction and affection can mask control and obsession. Respecting personal boundaries, recognizing red flags, and trusting your instincts are essential to protecting yourself from harm. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's choosing to act in your own best interest despite it. I can still remember the first day I met Owen Wallace. We were 5, sitting side by side on the green linoleum of Brighton Falls Elementary, staring at the teacher like we'd just been dropped on a different planet. He had this crooked smile that made you feel like he knew a secret the rest of the world didn't. I don't know what it was exactly, but I knew right then I wanted him on my side. Through childhood, we were inseparable. From biking along the forest trails that bordered our town to staying up late playing video games, we were always together. If someone needed a partner for a dare, or someone to sneak into the creek past curfew, we were each other's go-to. Our friendship felt eternal, like the kind of bond that didn't bend or break. Then came January 2022, a month that changed everything. I was at a weekend art workshop in Portland, painting landscapes with brushes that made the sky bleed colors I'd never seen before. I should have been enjoying it, but my phone kept buzzing in my backpack. When I finally checked it, my stomach dropped. Multiple missed calls from Owen's mom, then a voicemail that made me freeze in place. Lucas, the house, Owen. I don't remember the drive home. Fog and rain blurred the road, but the details don't matter. What does matter is the fire. Owen's family home, the one he grew up in with creaking floors and the smell of cinnamon bread on Sundays, was gone. Firefighters told me he died trapped in his room. The words didn't make sense at first. My brain refused to process them. Trapped, gone. My best friend was gone. Brighton Falls mourned. Candles lined the streets. Townspeople whispered condolences, but their words sounded hollow, like they were talking about someone else's life, someone else's grief. I spiraled into a hollow routine: classes, meals, the occasional phone call that I didn't really answer. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying our last conversation, the last laugh, the last time I saw him alive. Months passed, but I began seeing him. At first, I told myself it was grief. Shadows that looked like his frame, reflections in windows, a smirk on a stranger's face. But it got worse. Standing silently behind the grocery store counter, appearing at the edge of my dorm room window, following me on the forest trails. He looked exactly as he always did. Crooked smile, familiar stance, eyes locking onto mine as if nothing had changed. I couldn't escape the feeling that he was still here. One night in March, I woke to a whisper, soft, insistent, chilling. It wasn't an accident. You locked me in. My heart stopped. The memory hit me like a punch. Months before the fire, during a dare, I had jokingly barricaded Owen's bedroom door. I didn't think anything of it. He laughed, pushed it open, and we carried on. I had never imagined it could have consequences like this. Panic set in, so I went to the local police and confessed. Maybe guilt would help. Maybe justice would follow. But the investigation changed everything. The fire hadn't started from outside, from faulty wiring, or candles left unattended. It had been set, deliberately, from inside Owen's room. My mind spun. How could he have been trapped in his own room by fire that started inside? What had he known? What had he seen? I couldn't shake the memory of that whisper. You locked me in. It played over and over in my head, curling around my guilt like smoke around a candle flame. I kept seeing Owen everywhere, sometimes protective, sometimes accusatory. And every time I did, the question returned. Had my little joke caused something irreversible? I decided to visit the burned house. The town wouldn't let anyone in without proper clearance, but the fire marshal agreed to let me walk the perimeter. I remember the smell first: wet ash, charred wood, and the ghost of whatever chemical had fed the fire. My boots crunched over blackened debris, and each step felt like I was walking through memories that weren't mine. I reached what used to be Owen's room. The walls were blackened, brittle, almost skeletal in their decay. Then I saw it, a scorched, jagged marking etched into the plaster. Lucas. My stomach twisted. The handwriting was unmistakably his. My mind screamed, and my chest ached as tears stung my eyes. That night, I sat in my small apartment staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. I knew I hadn't meant to hurt him. But was that enough? Could it ever be enough? I realized then that grief wasn't just sadness. It was guilt and memory, and imagining what could have been done differently. Owen had been trying to protect me. That fact settled in slowly, like cold water spreading through my veins. He must have known something was wrong that night, something beyond my childish pranks. And I'd been blind to it. I started walking the streets of Brighton Falls more deliberately, as if I could see him if I looked hard enough. Sometimes I did. In the reflection of a storefront window, I saw him leaning against a brick wall, smiling. I called out, but nothing happened. His presence was never tangible, never solid, always just at the edges of perception, leaving me questioning my own sanity. One evening, I returned to the burned house with a flashlight. No one knew I went. I just needed to see the ruins. The night was silent, but heavy with rain. I pushed open the charred gate and crept into the backyard. Shadows danced across the skeletal frame of the house. I whispered his name. Owen. Something moved inside the ruin. A flicker of shadow, a shimmer of heat, or maybe it was my mind. Either way, I froze. Then I saw it, a small flash of movement near the room where he had died. I couldn't explain it. The memory of his note burned into the plaster, and now somehow he felt alive again. But alive to what end? Was he warning me, guiding me, or blaming me? I started digging into the fire further. The investigation files revealed a detail that made my chest constrict. The fire wasn't just set inside. It was intended to trap someone. And that someone, given the way the flames spread, could only have been Owen. But why? Why had he stayed? I met with the fire marshal, an older man named Jenkins who had known Owen's family. Lucas, he said carefully, I know it's hard, but your friend, he stayed to protect someone else. That's the kind of kid he was. I left, feeling both relieved and broken. Owen hadn't blamed me. He'd sacrificed himself. The guilt I'd carried was misplaced, yet the weight of loss didn't diminish. Some things are bigger than understanding, bigger than blame. Time went on, but Brighton Falls never felt the same. I walk its streets carefully, glancing at shadows, noticing patterns I never noticed before. Owen's presence lingers, sometimes comforting, sometimes accusing. The memories of our childhood, the laughter, the dares, the small moments of quiet companionship, are bittersweet now. I realized grief isn't just sorrow. It's vigilance, awareness, and acceptance of things you can't change. Owen's life and his death taught me that some secrets, some sacrifices, and some friendships leave marks that never fade. You carry them forward, shaping every decision, every glance, every choice. Guilt can blind us to the truth, but understanding, acceptance, and honoring those we've lost can guide us forward. Some acts of courage, some losses, and some truths are meant to teach us caution, empathy, and the weight of responsibility. And even in tragedy, love and loyalty endure. When I look back now, I can trace the turning point in my life to a chilly October night in 1995. I was 21 then, working shifts at a harbor cafe in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, while juggling my journalism classes at the University of New Hampshire. I wasn't anyone special, just another college kid with ambitions that outstripped my experience. I dreamed of uncovering scandals, telling the stories that mattered, but most nights, I ended up refilling coffee cups for fishermen or cleaning the espresso machine while the docks outside went dark and silent. That Halloween weekend, some friends from my media ethics class convinced me to come to a party near the waterfront. I almost didn't go. I had an early shift and dressing up for theme parties was never my style. But something in me was restless, so I threw on a half-hearted reporter costume, press badge, trench coat from a thrift store, and followed the noise and lights to a rented event space overlooking the bay. The party was a blur of fake cobwebs, pulsing music, and the smell of beer and cider. And then I saw her, Selena Marlowe. She stood near the windows, her platinum hair catching the light, her laugh cutting through the din like a song you couldn't forget. She wasn't dressed in anything elaborate, just a black dress and a sailor's cap tilted at an angle, but it was enough to freeze me in place. I didn't know then that she was a guest instructor at a local sailing program, or that she'd grown up on the coast with a childhood friend named Marina always close by. All I knew was that she moved through the room like she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. I must have been staring because she caught my eye and smirked. "You taking notes on everyone here, reporter boy?" The heat rushed to my face. Only the suspicious ones. That was all it took. She walked over, confident and unhurried, and suddenly the room felt smaller. Her eyes were the kind that saw too much. Sea green, bright and unsettling. She asked about my classes, teased me about my half-baked costume, and before I knew it, we were tucked into a corner, talking like the rest of the party had faded away. The night ended with her scribbling her number on a napkin and telling me to meet her by the docks the next afternoon. I walked home in the cold, clutching that napkin like it was a ticket to some other life. And in a way, it was. Meeting Selena felt like stepping into a movie. The problem was, I didn't realize until much later that I wasn't cast as the hero. The early days with Selena were intoxicating. She had this restless energy, like she was always chasing the next thrill. We'd drive out to secluded beaches and build small fires, roasting marshmallows while she told stories about sailing competitions and places she wanted to see. She'd dive into the freezing Atlantic without hesitation, daring me to follow. I usually did. For a kid like me, cautious and methodical, her world felt like an escape. I wanted to believe I'd stumbled onto something rare, a girl who carried summer with her even as the leaves turned and the air bit at our cheeks. She was playful, flirtatious, and impossibly magnetic. When she laughed, people listened. When she touched my arm, I felt grounded and unmoored at the same time. She teased me about my seriousness, about my obsession with deadlines and news stories. "You've got to loosen up," she'd say, tugging me toward the water. But cracks began to show. She was intensely private. If I asked about her family, she'd change the subject. If I pressed about her sailing mentor, a former pro named Drew, who still lingered around the program, she'd brush it off with a sly smile. And there was Marina, her childhood friend. Selena spoke of her often, but with a guarded tone, like Marina held pieces of her past I wasn't allowed to see. One night in November, after a late shift at the cafe, I found Selena waiting for me outside, leaning against her Jeep. She insisted on driving us out to a stretch of highway that cut through the woods. Music blasted, and she pressed the gas harder than I liked, laughing when I told her to slow down. "You don't trust me?" she shouted over the wind. I gripped the seat. "I trust you. I don't trust the road." She grinned but didn't ease up, and though I laughed with her, a knot tightened in my stomach. She wasn't reckless by accident. She wanted to see if I'd hold on. That was the first time I felt the pull between attraction and unease. She could make me feel like the only person in the world, then leave me questioning what I'd agreed to without realizing it. And every time I hesitated, every time I showed a crack in my composure, her eyes lit up like she'd scored a point in a game only she was playing. By December, the games weren't subtle anymore. Selena wanted all of me. My time, my attention, my loyalty, and she knew exactly how to test it. She started small. "Why'd you sit next to Claire in class?" she asked one afternoon, her tone playful but sharp. When I said Claire was just a group partner, Selena pouted, then laughed it off. But later that week, she showed up at the cafe during my shift, waiting until I finished talking to a customer before slipping her hand into mine and whispering, "Don't forget who you belong to." It was flirtation, but edged with something else. Possession. She didn't like my friends, said they distracted me. Slowly, I stopped showing up to study sessions or weekend hangouts. At first, I told myself it was my choice. I wanted to spend time with her. But it was more than that. Selena had a way of making my absence from others feel like proof of my devotion. One night, we sat by the pier after a Halloween-themed study session had stretched late. The water was black, the air sharp with salt and cold. Selena leaned against me, her hair brushing my cheek. "You'd never leave me, right?" she murmured. "Of course not." She tilted her head, eyes glinting. "You wouldn't survive without me." It was playful, the kind of line you expect from a romance movie, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, and a shiver crawled down my spine. The next week she tested me again. She picked a fight over nothing, accusing me of ignoring her calls when I was in class. Then she disappeared for 2 days, reappearing with Marina at her side, both of them laughing too loudly, as if I were supposed to feel the sting. I told myself it was just passion, that all intense relationships came with fire. But beneath that excuse was a gnawing fear. I was losing myself in her orbit, and she seemed to revel in it. The night that finally cracked the illusion came just before winter break. I'd finished a late shift and was walking home when I spotted Selena waiting again by her Jeep. She smiled like nothing had been wrong between us. Like the fights, the tests, the disappearances were all part of some script we'd agreed to. We drove aimlessly, her hand occasionally brushing my knee, her laughter filling the car. But as we pulled onto a deserted stretch of coastal road, she grew quiet. "Do you trust me?" she asked suddenly. "Yes," I said automatically. She pressed harder. "Enough to give up everything else? Friends, school, family, just me and you against the world?" I hesitated. She noticed. Her face hardened, and for the first time I saw the mask slip completely. "You can't hesitate," she said coldly. "If you hesitate, you don't love me." I didn't know what to say. I muttered something about being tired, about needing balance. She stared at me for a long time, then laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "Balance is for people afraid of living," she snapped. Then she pressed the gas, and the car surged forward, hugging icy curves as I clutched the door handle. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment, every red flag I'd brushed aside. The lies, the manipulation, the thrill-seeking that always ended with me scared and her triumphant. I realized I didn't know where she ended and I began anymore. So when winter break came, I didn't call her. I let the silence grow. And by January, she was gone, moved on, vanished from my life as abruptly as she'd entered. At the time, it felt like heartbreak. But in hindsight, it was survival. Years later, I was living in Portland, Maine. I'd graduated, found work at a small local paper, and built a quieter life. I had a steady routine, a modest apartment, and friends I could finally trust again. One rainy afternoon in 2003, I was flipping through an old stack of newspapers at the office looking for archived reports for a piece I was writing. That's when I saw her name, Selena Marlowe. The article was blunt. She'd been arrested in connection with the murders of 3 elderly women in coastal towns. Strangled, their identities stolen, their credit cards used to fund trips across the country. The report said she'd changed her appearance multiple times to evade capture. Authorities called her manipulative, calculating, and dangerous. I read the article 3 times, my chest tightening with each pass. I wanted to say I was shocked, but I wasn't. Not entirely. I thought back to the games, the lies, the way she tested loyalty and reveled in control. What I had seen was only the rehearsal for something darker. That night I sat by my apartment window, listening to the rain against the glass, thinking about the boy I'd been in 1995. Naive, eager, blind to red flags because I mistook manipulation for passion. I thought about her smile, about the way she could make the world feel electric and terrifying all at once. And I realized I'd been lucky. Lucky to have escaped before her games turned lethal. The memory of Selena has never left me. It clings to me like the salt air of Portsmouth, a reminder that not every dazzling light leads somewhere safe. Charm can be a mask, and passion can hide control. The people who make you feel alive can also be the ones who strip pieces of you away, leaving you smaller than you were before. Love should never demand the sacrifice of your identity or your peace. When instincts whisper warnings, listen. Ignoring red flags may not just cost you your heart, it can cost you your life. When I think back to that November, the first thing that comes to mind isn't the snow or the lodge or even the storm. It's the silence. Not the kind you get in a library or during a test. This was heavier, like the mountains themselves had swallowed every sound and were holding it prisoner. I'd been restless that whole fall. Work assignments blurred together, my photography felt uninspired, and my apartment in Calgary felt like a box I couldn't breathe in. So when Rowan suggested a mountain trip, I didn't need convincing. He said he'd found a century-old hunting lodge tucked into the Rockies, isolated but still standing proud. The photos online looked like something out of a history book, and the idea of shooting wildlife in the snow hooked me instantly. Theo jumped on board because he loved feeding people. He claimed he'd make a feast from whatever we could pack into the SUV. Sienna hesitated, chewing her lip the way she always did, muttering about how remote places freaked her out. But her loyalty outweighed her nerves, and she finally said yes. The four of us crammed our gear into Theo's sister's SUV, music blaring, joking about who'd be the first to slip on the ice. The closer we got to the lodge, though, the thinner the chatter grew. The highway gave way to winding mountain roads, snow piled high on either side, pine trees like black teeth against a dim sky. By the time we saw the lodge cresting over the tree line, the sun had slipped behind the mountains. It was bigger than I expected. A hulking structure of timber and stone, its roof steep and sagging in places, windows dark and hollow. Rowan practically vibrated with excitement, rambling about original architecture and historical preservation. I just grabbed my camera, snapping shots of the lodge against the blood-orange horizon. Inside, the place smelled like wood smoke and dust. Furniture was heavy and old, the kind you'd see in antique stores, draped in faded quilts. We unpacked, each of us staking claim to a room upstairs. Theo got the fire roaring, the flames throwing shadows across the beams overhead. We cooked pasta, oversalted but edible, and played cards until the storm thickened outside, wind howling against the windows. It should have felt cozy, safe even. But as I leaned toward the window to watch the snow whip into spirals, I caught a shape in the tree line. Just a figure still, half swallowed by the dark. My chest tightened. "Someone's out there," I whispered. Rowan laughed, tossing a card onto the pile. "You've been looking through a camera too long. Tricks of the light." The others teased me, but the image stayed burned in my mind. A silhouette standing too still for too long. That was our first night. The first time the silence pressed harder than it should have. The first time I wondered if this retreat was a mistake. The storm worsened overnight. By morning, the world outside was a sheet of white, the trees bending under its weight. We gathered in the kitchen, steam rising from mugs of instant coffee, the mood brittle. Theo cursed at the generator after it sputtered and died, leaving us with flickering firelight. "We've got food, plenty of wood," he said, forcing cheer. "No problem." But tension snuck in through small cracks. Rowan insisted he knew how to stack the logs, the right way. Theo rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. Sienna hovered near me, chewing her lip raw. "Something's wrong," she whispered. I didn't sleep. I heard footsteps outside. I wanted to believe she was exaggerating, but her wide eyes told me she believed it. That night, after we settled back into card games, I felt the storm press closer. The wind had a low whistle like it carried words in it. I forced myself to laugh with the others, but my gaze kept darting to the windows. Sometime around midnight, I woke to silence. The storm had died suddenly, unnaturally. I noticed Sienna's bed was empty. Panic spiked through me. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight, stumbling down the stairs. The lodge was dark, except for faint embers in the fireplace. I swung the beam across the walls, calling softly. No answer. I opened the front door. Snow drifted in, and the cold bit my face. Then, a shape staggered out of the trees. It was Sienna. Her hair plastered with frost, eyes wide and unfocused. She collapsed into my arms, trembling. "There's someone watching us," she whispered. "Standing right out there." Her voice was raw, her skin ice cold. I dragged her inside, but she wouldn't stop shaking. Rowan tried to soothe her, muttering about paranoia, but even he looked uneasy. That was the second night. The night fear began to eat at all of us. By dawn, the firewood pile had dwindled, and Theo volunteered to check the generator again. He stomped into his boots, still cracking jokes, but I saw the stiffness in his shoulders. Minutes stretched into an hour. Rowan cursed, tugging his coat on. "I'll get him. Probably tinkering out there like a fool." But neither of them came back. The lodge felt cavernous with just Sienna and me. She wrung her hands, whispering theories, her voice darting between fear and anger. "They're messing with us. Or maybe, it's the man outside, don't you see? He's hunting us." Her words wrapped around my chest, squeezing. Every creak of the old wood made me jump. Every shadow stretched too long. When night fell again, we sat in the kitchen, knives clutched in trembling hands. I didn't trust her, not fully. She didn't trust me either. Her eyes glittered in the firelight. "You think it's me, don't you?" My grip tightened on the knife. "Tell me the truth, Sienna." "I didn't touch them," she screamed, the sound splitting through the silence. We circled each other, our breaths harsh, knives raised like animals backed into corners. I don't remember deciding. I just remember the plunge, the warmth against my hand, and Sienna's shocked gasp. She crumpled against the floor, crimson pooling beneath her. Her breath rattled, eyes locked on mine. "You weren't supposed to remember," she whispered. My stomach lurched. "What?" But her eyes glazed over before she could finish. Then came the flood. Memories not as I'd lived them, but as I'd hidden them. The drive up, alone in the SUV. The empty lodge echoing as I dragged my bag inside. The laughter by the fire wasn't real. It was my own voice bouncing back. Rowan's lectures, Theo's jokes, Sienna's anxious whispers, they were pieces of me, broken into separate bodies. I stumbled through the house, opening every door, calling their names. Only silence answered. Their rooms were empty, the beds untouched. The kitchen knife slipped from my bloody hand. It was me. It had always been me. Days blurred. Snow sealed the lodge from the world, and I sat by the fireplace, my camera abandoned on the table. Sometimes I swore I still heard Theo humming, or Rowan pacing upstairs. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of Sienna's hair in the corner of my vision. But when I turned, there was only emptiness. The storm finally broke, and the silence thickened. When rescuers arrived weeks later, they found me slumped in the kitchen, half-starved, muttering to people who weren't there. They said I'd rented the lodge alone. No record of my friends, no evidence anyone else had stepped foot inside. And maybe that's the truth. Or maybe the storm swallowed them whole. All I know is that in the stillness of night, I still hear them. Isolation doesn't always come from the world outside. It can live within us, hidden in the fractures of our own minds. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't the storm or the shadows in the woods, but the darkness we carry, unacknowledged, until it consumes everyone we love, or convinces us they were never there at all. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know how time stretches differently. In my hometown, a sleepy lakeside place in Oregon, fall rolled in with the smell of wet cedar and smoke from wood stoves. By early September of 2014, the air carried that sharp edge that made you pull your jacket tighter after the sun dipped behind the hills. I was 16, a high school junior, and still caught somewhere between the feeling of being invincible and the nagging suspicion that maybe I wasn't. I've always loved astronomy. On clear nights, I'd drag an old telescope out to the dock behind our house, leaning into the cold eyepiece until my breath fogged it up. There was something about looking at the stars, knowing they were ancient, unreachable, and yet mapped across the sky, that made the world feel less suffocating. My best friend Jasper never really understood why I obsessed over constellations. He was more earthbound, more interested in stories about what lurked in the woods than what burned light years away. "Man, you care more about Orion than you do about prom," he teased once. "And you care more about ghost stories than passing English," I shot back. That was Jasper, careful, introverted, always scribbling ideas for short stories in a notebook he carried everywhere. We'd been inseparable since middle school despite our differences. Where I was impulsive and restless, Jasper was cautious and calculating. My mom used to say we balanced each other out. Maybe she was right. That Friday night, after the home soccer game, we decided not to wait for my older sister to pick us up. The idea of walking home felt liberating. Just two friends cutting across the back roads, dodging curfews and lectures. The shortcut we picked wasn't exactly recommended. The old logging road. Everyone in town knew the place. It cut through a stretch of cedar forest and passed by fields where grass grew higher than your shoulders. Along the way sat abandoned cabins with sagging roofs, places that looked like they belonged in one of Jasper's stories. Most people avoided it after dark, not because anything ever officially happened there, but because of how it felt. Wrong, like the woods themselves were watching. "Bet you won't last 10 minutes without freaking out," I said as we turned onto the cracked asphalt. He smirked but adjusted his backpack straps like he was bracing for a test. "Bet you'll scream first." The sun was bleeding out across the horizon, painting the trees orange before it slipped away entirely. Our sneakers crunched against gravel and our laughter echoed louder than it should have, as if the woods swallowed sound and spat it back at us, warped. We joked at first, trading memories of dumb pranks and times we'd been spooked by shadows. Jasper brought up the raccoon incident, which he would never let me live down. I reminded him of the time he refused to go into the school basement during a fire drill because it felt haunted. We laughed, but the deeper we went, the quieter we became. The forest thickened around us, cedar branches reaching overhead like dark ribs, shutting out the sky. I glanced up out of habit, looking for constellations, but the canopy swallowed the stars. That was the first moment I felt it, the subtle prickle of unease at the base of my neck. I shook it off. This was just a road, I told myself, just trees and shadows, nothing more. But by the time night fully settled, I would learn how quickly shadows can turn into something else, something you don't laugh about later, something that stays with you long after the night ends. We were maybe halfway down the logging road when Jasper stopped walking. His hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising force. "Finn," he whispered, "I think someone's following us." I squinted into the darkness, my eyes straining. The road stretched ahead, cracked and overgrown, with the faint outline of a cabin to the left. Behind us, only shadows. "There's nobody there," I said, trying to sound casual. But then we both heard it, soft crunching, like footsteps pressing into gravel. The sound stopped when we stopped, started when we started. Jasper's face went pale, the glow from his phone flashlight catching the edges of his wide eyes. "You hear that, right?" "It's probably just an animal," I said, though the words came out thinner than I wanted. "Deer or something." "Deer don't stop when we stop," he shot back. The sound came again. Crunch. Crunch. Closer this time. My heart beat faster. I forced myself to shrug, though my chest felt tight. "Fine. Maybe it's some drunk guy heading home from the game, who cares?" But I did care. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. Every time the wind shifted, it carried strange moans through the cedar branches, almost like voices half-formed. We picked up the pace. My knee scraped when I tripped over a root, blood staining my jeans. I muttered a curse, brushing dirt away, while Jasper clutched his backpack like a shield. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, though the sting in my leg was sharp. We pressed on, the woods pressing in tighter around us. Shadows seemed to twitch at the corners of my vision. The only steady sound was the thud of my pulse in my ears. Then Jasper stopped again. "We can't keep walking this road, we need to cut through the clearing." "What clearing?" He pointed into the darkness. Through the trees, a faint gap in the canopy glowed slightly with moonlight. "That way." I hesitated. The road, cracked and eerie as it was, at least had a direction. The clearing meant going blind into the woods. "Come on," Jasper urged. His voice trembled. "Trust me." And that's when he ran, into the trees, into the dark. I had no choice but to follow. Branches whipped against my face as I stumbled after him. The cedar needles crackled underfoot and roots clawed at my sneakers. I gasped, trying to keep up, but Jasper moved faster than I'd ever seen him run. "Slow down," I yelled. No answer. The woods seemed alive with sound now, rustling leaves, snapping branches, a low hum that vibrated in my chest. Every shadow looked like it was moving, and every direction felt wrong. Then I realized I couldn't hear Jasper anymore. "Jasper?" My voice cracked. Silence. I spun in circles, my flashlight beam slicing through the trees. Nothing. No sign of him. The clearing stretched ahead, pale with moonlight, but it felt vast and empty. My breaths came shallow and fast. Something moved at the edge of the clearing. A figure. My chest seized. "Jasper?" I tried again. Still no answer. Just the wind, carrying sounds that didn't belong, like whispers too low to catch. Panic clawed at me. I bolted, crashing through the underbrush until I stumbled back onto the abandoned road. My lungs burned. My scraped knee throbbed, and I was alone. By the time I made it home, I was trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. My mom was asleep, my sister out late, the house unnervingly quiet. I dialed Jasper's house, hands shaking. His dad answered groggily. "Finn, it's late. What's wrong?" Is Jasper there?" I asked, my voice breaking. A pause. "He's been here all night. Why?" My stomach dropped. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible. He was with me. He ran into the woods." But the words crumbled in my throat. Because the truth was clear no matter how much I wanted to deny it. Whoever, whatever had been with me on that road, it hadn't been Jasper. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe I'd been exhausted from the game. Maybe the adrenaline twisted my memory. Maybe I hallucinated. That's what my mom suggested when I finally confessed. But deep down, I knew what I felt was real. The footsteps, the whispers, the figure guiding me into the clearing. Real enough to scar. I avoided the logging road after that. Even the sight of cedar trees made my chest tighten. Nights spent under the stars felt different too, less comforting, more fragile. I still loved astronomy, but now I understood how easily perception could fracture, how quickly the world you think you know can slip sideways. Sometimes walking home late, I swear I hear it again. Crunch. Crunch. Footsteps matching mine. I remind myself it's just memory, just nerves. But the unease never leaves. And I'll never forget the worst part. That night, I trusted the wrong voice. Fear isn't always about what's out there in the dark. It's about what happens inside your mind when the dark presses too close. The unknown plays tricks, bending reality until you can't trust your own senses. But trust is fragile, and once broken, it lingers like a scar. The lesson I carry is this. Respect fear, but don't let it blind you. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't a monster. It's the way your own mind convinces you one is there. It's strange how ordinary nights can burn themselves into memory, not because of what we planned to do, but because of what happened instead. Looking back now, November 2016 doesn't feel that long ago, but in a way, it feels like a different life. I was 16 then, restless and awkward, caught between wanting to grow up fast and secretly wishing I could stay a kid. That Friday evening, rain hammered the windows of my family's new house. We had moved into the place only a month earlier, a big, older home tucked into one of Portland's quieter neighborhoods. From the outside, it looked like the kind of house people described as charming. White siding, a wide porch, even a little yard where the grass always seemed wet. But inside, especially in the basement, there was a different feel, one I hadn't gotten used to yet. The basement was huge, unfinished, and always carried the smell of damp concrete. Half of it was cluttered with cardboard boxes from the move, stacked like crooked towers. Old furniture leaned against the walls, tools lined shelves in disorganized piles, and in the far corner sat the furnace, old and clunky, groaning when it kicked on. Even with bright bulbs overhead, shadows always pooled in corners like they had nowhere else to go. That night, my best friend Elias came over for a sleepover. We'd been friends since 6th grade, bonded first over video games, then over our habit of tinkering with electronics. Elias was the quieter one, always careful, always observing, while I was impulsive and quick to joke. He had brought his brand new virtual reality headset, a bulky thing he'd saved up for with months of mowing lawns. "You sure your basement has enough space for this?" Elias asked, looking around as we spread out sleeping bags on the cold floor. "Plenty," I said. "It's basically a dungeon. No one's gonna bother us down here." We set up the VR headset, dragged an old TV and console onto a low table, and powered everything up. The glow from the screen cut through the dimness, giving the basement a softer feel. The storm outside was steady, rain tapping against the tiny windows near the ceiling. For a while, it was perfect. We played co-op games, laughing, shouting at each other, trash-talking when one of us messed up. Elias's headset fogged up once from laughing so hard, and I teased him that he looked like a robot overheating. Then, somewhere past midnight, came the first sound. Tap. It was faint, almost dismissible. Elias paused, lowering the headset. "What was that?" "The house settling," I said automatically. "Old wood makes noises." But my eyes drifted to the far corner where the furnace sat. Shadows stretched long, and something about the darkness felt heavier. We went back to the game. Tap. Tap. This time Elias kept staring at the corner. I laughed nervously, trying to push away the weird knot forming in my stomach. "If you're trying to creep me out, it's not working." But it was. That was the first night I realized how quickly fun could twist into unease, how fast laughter could die in a silence that didn't feel natural. The tapping didn't stop. It grew faintly rhythmic, like someone drumming fingers against wood. Elias set the headset aside, his flashlight beam sweeping across the floor. The light wavered once, flickered, then steadied. "Look," he whispered. I followed the beam to the corner. For a split second, so quick I almost convinced myself I imagined it, I saw movement, a pale shape like a hand retreating behind a stack of boxes. My throat went dry. "Nice try," I said, forcing a laugh. "You moved something." Elias shook his head. "I didn't, I swear." We both stood. The game was paused, controllers abandoned on the concrete. Our sneakers scuffed as we stepped toward the furnace. Each footstep echoed more than it should have, bouncing around the basement like the space was too big for us. When we got close, the tapping stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. It wasn't empty silence. It was thick, pressing, as if the basement itself was holding its breath. Elias shone the flashlight directly behind the boxes. Dust, old crates, nothing else. "You happy now?" I asked, trying to sound casual. My voice cracked anyway. He didn't answer. His face was pale, his jaw tight. We stood there a moment longer before retreating to our sleeping bags, pretending nothing had happened. But neither of us relaxed. We left the game paused, the TV humming faintly, and lay side by side, listening to the storm. Every drip, every groan of the furnace felt amplified. Around 2 a.m., my eyelids grew heavy. I told myself it was just nerves, just imagination. Houses made noise. Shadows played tricks. That's all. At least that's what I tried to believe. Sometime around 3, I woke to the sound of Elias's hand clutching my arm. His eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light from the TV. "Listen," he whispered. "Tap, tap, tap." It wasn't coming from the corner this time. It was coming from the basement door, the one at the top of the stairs. The sound was heavier now, deliberate, like someone testing the wood. We both froze. My mouth went dry. It's following us," Elias breathed. The tapping came again. Slow. Measured. I thought about running upstairs, about calling my parents, but the idea of turning my back on that door felt impossible. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. "What do we do?" Elias asked. "Go upstairs," I whispered, though the words felt like betrayal in my throat. We stood, moving as one, hands clutching each other. The stairs creaked under our weight. With each step we took upward, another knock followed, timed with us. The wood groaned, shadows stretched along the wall. At the top, I snapped. "Mom! Dad!" I shouted, my voice breaking. The tapping stopped. The hall light flicked on. My dad appeared, rubbing his eyes, his face annoyed but softening when he saw us. "What's going on?" "There was knocking," I said quickly. "On the basement door, we heard it." Mom came up behind him, concerned. "What knocking?" Together they followed us down. Dad flipped on every light. The basement flooded with harsh brightness, chasing away every shadow. He checked the door. Nothing. He checked the boxes. Nothing. He even opened the furnace panel. Still nothing. "You two spooked yourselves," he said finally. "Stormy nights, creaky house. Happens." But Elias and I exchanged a glance. We knew what we'd heard. That night, we abandoned the basement. We dragged our sleeping bags upstairs to the living room. Mom left a nightlight plugged in for us, the kind usually meant for little kids. Neither of us argued. Every creak of the house made us jump. Every gust of wind rattling the windows sent our hearts racing. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and uneasy. By morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight filled the house. Everything looked normal. Too normal. But the basement, quiet and still beneath us, no longer felt like part of the house. It felt separate, watching, waiting. We never went back down there alone. After that night, even getting tools from the shelves felt like a dare. If I needed something, I made excuses or dragged Elias with me. He didn't argue. He was just as shaken. We never told anyone else at school. How could we? No one would believe us. They'd laugh and say we were paranoid, scared kids in a big creaky house. But I remember the sound, the tapping, the rhythm of it. Too steady to be the house. Too deliberate to be chance. Sometimes, even now, years later, if I'm in a basement or an old building and hear a knock or a creak, my chest tightens. I'm 16 again, standing frozen with Elias, watching shadows move where shadows shouldn't. And I wonder, was it just imagination fed by storm and exhaustion? Or was something really there, testing us, seeing how far fear could stretch? I don't know. I probably never will. But I do know this. Some nights leave scars you can't explain. And that night, November 2016, carved one into me. Fear has a way of teaching us what logic can't. It blurs the line between imagination and reality, showing how fragile our certainty really is. That night in the basement taught me that courage isn't about pretending you're not scared. It's about admitting you are. and still facing the unknown beside someone you trust. And sometimes, even without answers, the bond of that trust is what gets you through the dark. I still remember the smell of the salt air that September evening in 2019. It clung to my jacket as if the Atlantic itself had reached inside Seabrook, Maine, a sleepy coastal town where nothing much ever seemed to happen. I was 13, nervous about moving schools and excited at the same time when Harper Lane invited me over for a sleepover at her family's house. It was a weathered, two-story house perched on cliffs overlooking the water, gray shingles peeling slightly, an overgrown gravel driveway, and the faint tang of seaweed and salt that hit me the moment I stepped out of the car. Rowan, my best friend since elementary school, came along. She was always cautious, making lists and checking things twice. I swear she packed more for a sleepover than my mom did for a week-long trip. My mom reminded me one last time as we climbed the creaking porch stairs. "Stick together, Callie. Check in, trust your instincts. And remember, Harper's family is nice, but don't wander off." I rolled my eyes politely, though I knew she was right. Harper's house smelled of cardboard and old wood. Boxes from a recent move were stacked in the corners, giving the living room a shadowed maze-like quality. Harper herself was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, taking pictures with her camera, rearranging snacks, and laughing about nothing. We spent the evening unpacking, eating pizza from the nearby diner, blasting pop music and playing Truth or Dare in the cluttered living room. Rowan and I whispered about being careful when Harper's back was turned, but even she didn't seem concerned about anything. Until late at night. Around 11 p.m., Harper suggested a quick walk along a path through the tall pines leading down to the cliffside. Her mom, seemingly trusting, let us go. The air was brisk, carrying the salty tang of the ocean, and the darkness made everything seem bigger, sharper. Shadows from the trees stretched across the trail, and I could hear the distant crash of waves against rocks. Rowan held her flashlight tight, muttering under her breath about staying close. At first it was fun. Harper led us along hidden coastal paths, snapping photos of moss-covered rocks and twisted trees. I tried to laugh off the feeling in my stomach that maybe we were too far from home. But then I saw it. A figure, tall, hooded, moving strangely ahead of us. My stomach dropped. I whispered to Rowan, "He's following us." The figure didn't run or slow down. It matched our pace, and suddenly a rotten, unbearable stench hit me, making me gag. A metallic glint, a knife I realized, flashed briefly in the dim light. My heart hammered. Rowan grabbed my hand, and we bolted back toward the house, slamming the door behind us, too scared to wake Harper's parents. Even inside, safe behind locked doors, the adrenaline didn't leave. Every shadow, every floorboard creak, sounded like him. I didn't know then that the danger wasn't imaginary, that our night of innocent exploration had just scratched the surface of something far darker. Back inside Harper's living room, we tried to calm down. The pizza lay half-eaten, crumbs scattered across the carpet, but we ignored it. Harper's parents were asleep upstairs, oblivious. Rowan's hands shook as she fiddled with her flashlight, while I tried to convince myself it had been a weird coincidence. Maybe it was just someone jogging, I told myself. But the stench lingered, and my gut refused to lie. By 2 a.m., we decided to distract ourselves. Harper popped a scary movie in, the flickering images bouncing off the walls. I sat on the couch peeking out the cliffside windows, convinced I could see movement in the trees beyond the yard. Every crunch of leaves outside made my heart skip. Rowan refused to sit near the windows, whispering that the shadows were too long, too deliberate. An hour later, my flashlight beam caught movement outside. A shirtless, pale man vanishing between the pines just as Harper and Rowan looked. Harper's laugh died in her throat. "Did you see that?" she whispered. We all froze. Our minds wavered between imagination and reality, and the house felt colder than it had all evening. At 4:30 a.m., a sharp knock echoed through the house. My stomach flipped. I crept to the peephole. Nothing. Silence. Then the stench invaded indoors again, stronger, closer. Footsteps creaked along the hallway. Harper's dad appeared, shotgun in hand, but the figure had vanished by the time he arrived in the living room. We were left trembling, barely able to speak. The police arrived later that morning, searching the property and surrounding cliffs, but found nothing. They told us it was likely someone wandering or a prankster. I didn't believe them. The instinct that had screamed at me all night refused to quiet. Rowan clutched my arm and whispered that she'd never walk those paths again, and I agreed silently, knowing that the cliffs would forever feel haunted. A week later, the truth came in pieces. A shed nearby had been discovered, and inside were 5 decaying bodies. The jackets, the stench, the knife. It all made sense. Our night had been far too close to becoming a nightmare. Harper, Rowan, and I huddled in the living room, silent, the shadows now permanently etched into our memories. Sleepovers were canceled indefinitely. The wind from Blackthorn Cove seemed to carry ghostly whispers, and I could no longer look at the pines the same way. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every floorboard creak, every gust of wind against the windows made me tense. Rowan moved in with her aunt for a while, and even Harper seemed changed, quieter, hesitant to explore. My mom's warnings echoed in my head. Trust your instincts, and I realized how true that advice had been. The sense of safety I had taken for granted as a child was gone. Every unfamiliar sound, every darkened street corner, carried a potential threat. We tried talking about it, trying to normalize life, but normalcy was gone. Conversations often drifted back to what-ifs. We learned to check the paths during the day, to never walk alone, and to trust our gut feelings, even if our parents or authorities dismissed them. Years later, I still think about that night. The cliffs, the pines, and the smell of salt always bring a shiver, even in sunlight. But the experience taught me something essential. Danger can exist in places that seem safe, and instincts are worth listening to. I learned to take small precautions, to stay aware, and to value trust and intuition over bravado. Childhood innocence may be lost in a single night, but awareness, vigilance, and respect for one's feelings are lessons that last a lifetime. Safety is never guaranteed, and innocence can be threatened when we ignore our instincts. Listening to your gut, trusting your intuition, and respecting boundaries are essential to protecting yourself in the real world. Courage is not acting without fear. It's acting wisely despite it. I've always remembered that October as the month when the world stopped feeling entirely safe. I was 11, and my friends, Nolan, Beckett, and Felix, were the people I trusted more than anyone else. We grew up in Ashwood, Maine, in a neighborhood where Victorian estates spread across the outskirts like small, forgotten kingdoms. My house had one of the largest gardens, filled with overgrown bushes, ancient trees, and a gate that squeaked like it had been swinging since the Civil War. That weekend in 2008, the 4 of us decided to have a backyard campout, the kind of thing you think will just be fun and full of stories to laugh about later. I was the youngest, a little shy, obsessed with model airplanes and anything I could build with my hands. Nolan was the brave one, always daring us to climb higher or explore farther than we were supposed to. Beckett had this sharp, curious mind. He noticed every crack in the walls, every whisper of movement. Felix, the oldest by a few months, had this protective streak. He insisted on making sure no one got hurt, which on that night would become far more serious than any of us could have imagined. We spent the afternoon running around the yard, playing soccer and baseball until our faces turned pink and our hands were stiff from the cold. The garden was quiet except for our laughter, echoing off the house walls and the thick trees. I noticed that one of the gates leading to the woods was slightly open. I was sure I had locked it earlier, but I didn't want to make a fuss. Nolan waved it off, claiming he must have left it open during our game. I shrugged, though something in my stomach tensed up. As darkness settled, we set up tents and lit lanterns near a small fire pit. The glow made the yard feel warm and safe, the cold night air curling around our legs. We roasted marshmallows and told jokes, each boy trying to outdo the other with daring tales. I could see Felix's eyes darting to the shadows at the edge of the woods, but he didn't say anything. He said he would keep everyone safe, and that was enough for the rest of us to trust him. Later, we played hide-and-seek with flashlights, the beams slicing through the darkness. I was hiding behind a large hedge when I saw it, a tall, thin figure in a dark coat moving near the garden gate. I froze. Nolan and the others were nowhere near me, and the figure didn't make a sound. My heart thumped as I whispered to Felix. He shrugged nervously, trying to act calm. I wanted to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. We cautiously approached the gate together, and the figure was gone, vanished as suddenly as it appeared. Felix suggested we head back to the house, but Nolan, ever curious, argued we should check the edge of the woods, insisting nothing would happen if we stuck together. Reluctantly, we agreed, following him toward the tree line where shadows seemed to gather unnaturally. Around midnight, the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind us. The zipper of one tent creaked and a shadow loomed beyond the glow of our lanterns. Then he appeared, a man, thin and middle-aged, with unkempt hair and dark, piercing eyes. "What are you kids doing out here?" His voice was calm but mocking, like he knew exactly how terrified we were. Nolan tried to push him away, Felix yelled at him to stop, and I stood frozen. The man lunged at my ankle, gripping it roughly, and I screamed. The boys kicked and scrambled backward toward the house, hearts pounding so hard I thought they would burst through our chests. My dad grabbed a bat as the man muttered under his breath and retreated into the darkness. We huddled in the living room, shaking, while my mom called the police. Investigators arrived, took statements, and left with little assurance, explaining that he had disappeared into the woods. The next morning, the estate felt calm again, the sun spilling golden light over the lawn. But the garden, the gate, and the surrounding trees held an invisible tension, a reminder that danger could come without warning. That weekend changed something in all of us. We never camped in that yard again, and even years later I would lie awake imagining the thin figure near the gate, wondering if we had been watched, marked. Childhood innocence is fragile, I realized, and the world sometimes reminds you that safety is never guaranteed. The garden that once felt like a kingdom of adventure now carried a shadow, a lesson that trust and vigilance, courage and caution are inseparable, and that fear, when respected, can save lives.